Hello, ladies and gentlemen. This is another episode of the podcast Prepare for Future. I am Alex Gurdila. I'm producing it and recording it. Today, we have a very special person. I've been talking about it today on my Instagram, saying, I can't believe that last time I interviewed a guy that worked for Steven Spielberg, and now I'm talking to a Stanford professor. It's pretty cool for a guy that does a podcast in Moldova. Bret teaches entrepreneurship at Stanford University. He's recently had a speech here at an event in Moldova where he shared his experience with professionals from the innovation industries in the country. And today he's here at Prepare for Future podcast. Hi, Bret. Really nice to meet you. Thank you for accepting this really early podcast because it's 7 a.m. for you.
No problem. I'm up early and I've got my coffee and ready for a good conversation.
How often does Moldova pop up in the circles of innovation over there in the US? How did you ever hear of it before in this context?
Only recently. Recently, I've heard Moldova come up several times, but until recently, never.
What context was it? Was it like a conversation with your colleagues, your friends, or someone from Moldova mentioned it? How did it happen?
No, just that a couple of colleagues mentioned that there's some interesting things going on in Moldova these days.
Other than being neighboring to Ukraine.
yeah. Other than the fact that right, being neighboring Ukraine, exactly. Yeah.
So let's dive straight in. Silicon Valley is still and probably will be the capital of big money, big tech. You've said recently on your podcast or on a podcast. I still haven't figured out. Is it your podcast or on a podcast? You've said that Silicon Valley is basically migrating to cover the entire world. So investors are starting to find places and companies and innovations that they can invest around the world. Right.
So, the World Economic Forum says we're entering the fourth industrial revolution, right? And the first was very much around London and the steam engine. The second was around mass production and electricity. It was around kind of Detroit and Torino and the other big mass production centers. The third industrial revolution was very much computers, IT, internet, and completely focused around Silicon Valley. And now we're entering this fourth industrial revolution, which is kind of the merging of the cognitive, the biological, and the digital. And one of the salient things that makes this one different from the previous three is that it's not happening around just one spot. It's happening all over the world. And that there are clusters of innovation, clusters of entrepreneurship, clusters of capital all over the world today. And that makes this industrial revolution, this particular moment that we're in right now, different from any of the previous three. And for most of my career, if you wanted to have a tech startup, you pretty much had to be in Silicon Valley because this is where the ecosystem was, and this certainly was where the capital was. But, in 2022, 2023, it's completely different. You can have a tech startup anywhere in the world today. And it's partly because there's been a decoupling of setters of capital and setters of entrepreneurship, right? So in other words, you can raise capital from investors all over the world today in a way that just wasn't possible through my career. And also that, it used to be that one of the reasons you had to be in Silicon Valley was because this is where the ecosystem was. But today the ecosystem is virtual, right? That, if you want a marketing expert to help you out with something, you go to Upwork and find a marketing expert to help you out with something, right? So
There's countless of them. You don't even know what to pick.
Exactly. So you no longer have to be here to be part of the ecosystem because the ecosystem is, has moved to the cloud, if you will, or has moved to the Metaverse.
So with all the fear of recession coming, it's been looming for a few years now, but we know that the first thing that gets hit is ads, creative, tech. And we already have that with 11,000 people just from Meta, and I think like 100-something thousand in total just in the US from the big tech companies. How is that going to slow down or affect the entire, industry?
Well, it's a little early to know. But as you said, this slowdown is not a surprise. We all knew it was coming. And most of us thought when the pandemic started, well, this is it. This pandemic is going to cause the recession that we all knew was coming. And then it didn't, right? The pandemic didn't. But now we're having it. So
I think now we're having it because of the pandemic, right? Because we hired so many people, now we have to fire them. Yeah,
that's right. Yeah, that would be a short way of saying it. Is that unexpectedly many companies had to gear up during the pandemic, and now they're gearing back down again. And especially companies like Peloton that were doing, exceptionally well during the pandemic, and they thought they were just going to do well forever. So I don't know exactly how it will shake out. I think that I think overall it will be healthy. I've been through some cycles before. I was running I was CEO of a company during the .com crash in the year 2000, and I was CEO of another company during the 2008 recession. So I've seen these cycles before, and I think for the most part these cycles end up being healthy. But there's some pain in the short run for sure.
Basically, you're like, so we have this local thing in Moldova where when a new government comes in, the middle management that works for the government, like, yeah, we've seen people like you. It's fine.
Right.
We'll do things our own. We've seen this before.
Right.
Reforms and all that. Yeah, it's gonna be okay. But are you worried in any way? Is it more like is it gonna be more like a test, or is it going to be something that could crush it? Like, what's your impression of it?
Yeah, I think mostly it's I think mostly it's just it's a reset. That there were, that there were, well, certainly on the funding side, the valuations that were happening in venture funding were just completely out of control. Companies with, no more than a slide deck were getting tens of millions of dollars, at a valuation of hundreds of millions of dollars. It was just crazy. And so, we kind of needed a reset on that. I think overall, it's different than the previous two that I mentioned. So the .com crash was mostly about companies that didn't really there was no real sustainable business there. All they had was a website. And because they had a website and it was the beginning of the internet era, they were getting crazy valuations just because they had a website. But, companies like pets.com and Webvan, the others that crashed and burned during the .com cycle, they weren't real companies. And then 2008 was a little different because 2008 was really a systemic failure of the financial system in the US that then overflowed into Europe. This one is different because there's plenty of real businesses out there. Meta just laid off 11,000 people, but nobody's worried about whether or not Meta has a real business. Meta owns, they own Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp. Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp will continue to do well. They'll continue to be great advertising platforms. So that's not going away. I think it's more that this is a correction, if you will. It's a correction in the market. And it's a normal economic cycle, right? That we had about a 12-year bull run. And, you always, at the end of a 12-year bull run, you always have a little bit of a correction. So I think in the long run, things will be fine. And it's a great time, I think, right now to be an entrepreneur with a startup because, in the past, many great startups have begun during recessions. Uber and Airbnb both started during the 2008 recession. So it's often a great time to create a startup. And startups usually do better during recession than big incumbent companies do because startups are smaller, they're more agile, they're more lean. So they already kind of have the things that are good to have during a recession, whereas the big companies are busy trying to lay off people and figure out, how the hell they get the burn down. And also that while venture capital funding is definitely off, early stage is holding up pretty well. So seed financings are still happening at about the same same pace. It's the later stage, the Series B, Series C, kind of more the growth stage financings that are difficult right now, whereas the early stage financings are holding up pretty well. So I think it's a great time to be an entrepreneur right now.
So basically what I hear is if you have some sort of idea, you should wait for the recession to kick in and then see how you can apply.
Yeah.
See how you can start your startup, and then you can become the next Mark Zuckerberg. Be like, don't launch it yet. Sit on it a little bit. Speaking of corrections and companies that have to figure out stuff, in an interview in 2018, you said that it's kind of expected that about 75% of S&P 500 companies will have to get turnover in the next 10 years. It's been 4 years since, so we're almost at the half distance in time. Is your prediction still the same? Do we still have companies in the S&P 500 that shouldn't really be there?
Yeah, I think so. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think if we looked at it, we'd see that there's been turnover in the last 4 years. So I think here's the overall point that I think I was making in that interview is that it used to be that once a company got to a certain scale, certain maturity, that they'd have a good, 20, 30, 40, 50 year run. And there's all kinds of advantages now to being an incumbent, large incumbent player. And that's changed in the last generation or so in that it's much easier today for new startups to come in and disrupt incumbent players. And that you basically, as an big incumbent company, you have to embrace innovation today in a way that you didn't used to have to. And we see lots of examples like, for example, Kodak, which once had a 90% market share in camera film, photography film. They didn't really want to embrace digital photography because if they had embraced digital photography, that would have cannibalized their sale of film, right? And today Kodak is, bankrupt. A company that once controlled 90% of the photography market. And if they had embraced innovation, embraced digital photography, they today probably could be the leading provider of digital cameras, right? But they didn't.
I think they're actually selling old cameras now at a very fast rate. Like people are slowly warming up to it. Yeah. Yeah,
but they're not the $100 billion huge company that they once were. And there are many.
They were the Nokia of photography.
Yeah, the Nokia photography, exactly. There's a more recent example. Nokia, right? Nokia once owned the smartphone business, and they didn't embrace innovation quickly enough. And and now Android and iOS own the smartphone business. And of course, there's lots of other examples like this too, right? All the taxi companies. If they had done a better job of embracing innovation, Uber wouldn't exist today. But because the taxi companies, resisted any kind of innovation, they wanted to do business the same way they'd done business for 30 years. And that's what created the opportunity for Uber to come in and rule the world.
It kind of feels like every major company, once it becomes major, should do what tech companies do, like Google or other companies, where they pay hackers to try to break in.
Yeah.
So they should pay someone to try to disrupt their market, come up with an idea that might disrupt their market and start that thing. So they disrupt themselves by building, a new path, because business nowadays, if anything, it has to evolve constantly. You can't say, okay, we're going to make steel for 1,000 years. No. You're going to make steel for 50 and then you're going to be useless.
Exactly. Yeah. When I teach entrepreneurship at Stanford, we talk about the standard things of, launch an MVP of your product and iterate quickly upon the product based on input from customers, yada, yada, yada. And I had one student ask me once, so when do I know that it's okay to stop iterating on my product? And the answer, of course, is never, that you constantly iterate on your product. And as you said, companies like Google, they're doing that, right? They're constantly iterating on products, trying new features, killing old features.
Fail
fast. That's right. there's a whole website dedicated to Google's failures. I forget the name of the website, but it's a whole website that has all the list of all the products that Google has killed.
Sounds familiar, but I think some other big tech company really was it. I think it was Steam or something. They released something. It was really cool. People really hyped about it, and then a year in, like, no, we're just going to cancel that. So at the same time, you have the users, the market, right? The consumers that will punish you for it because they invested time. They decided to go with you out of the bazillion of options that they have, and you fail them. So that's another way where you can fail if you keep iterating too much. If you fail, it'd be like, no, I'll just go with the ones that makes one product every 5 years, but it's good.
Right. Yep. That is the risk for sure.
You since you teach entrepreneurship, probably most students you have are all just focused on startups that want to disrupt something. What drives, from your experience, the success or a failure of a startup?
Yeah, I teach an entire course on exactly this topic. And so I've developed a process I call the launch path, and it's basically a set of things to do as you get ready to launch your startup. And if you do these things, you will have a improved chance of success. And in the first step on the launch path, I talk about how most great startups begin with a founder who notices a problem worth solving. And there's this kind of mythology that it's about thinking up a great startup idea, right? But I think usually it's better to think of it in terms of noticing a problem worth solving. And then a founder that kind of falls in love with solving that problem ends up being successful. Because in the end, passion and drive and tenacity, those are the things that matter, right? For a startup founder. And so kind of falling in love with a problem worth solving is often what gives you the drive and the passion and the tenacity to make it happen.
But what makes you fail? Is it when you start hiring the wrong people for it? Is it when you step away? What makes it fail in the first place?
So there's a terrific book that came out about 2 years ago from a Harvard Business School professor. And the title of the book is Why Startups Fail. So it's all about this. And the reasons are, so the number one reason is no market need. So the number one reason is building a product that you think the world needs and then finding out that the world doesn't care. The number two reason is team, wrong team. So team disharmony. Another leading reason that I preach a lot about is customer acquisition cost against lifetime value of a customer. That an awful lot of startups die because they don't thoroughly understand the unit economics of their venture. And if they spent a little more time kind of studying the unit economics, they would have realized sooner that that it's going to cost them $28 for each customer that they get, but they're only going to make $14 from that customer. So that is in my
economics.
It's so it seems like a really simple concept, right? That every venture has to have a way of getting customers at a cost less than they can make from them. Seems very intuitive and obvious, and yet it remains a leading cause of startup death. Is realizing too late that your all-in cost of getting customers is more than what you are making from those customers.
I've recently worked with a startup who was meaning and actually working really good on disrupting the CRM business for medical like administration, file, everything, customer management, everything. They were doing a really, really good job. And my understanding was that the CEO and the co-founder of the company had some sort of personal issues that affected the entire team. And when the team suggested he should step down, he kind of decided to make them leave. So they left, and that ended up with him burning out through the whole thing. His co-founder left. The product died. Even though when I spoke to some of the people, some of his customers, including future customers that were interested in his product, they said, I thought that was a great tool. It's too bad that it died. So in his case, it was more the desire to be the next Mark Zuckerberg rather than have a product that works by itself. And then you can kind of build your own brand on it. Like, yeah, we built that stuff. I'm guessing ego plays a big factor in this.
Absolutely. Yeah. And
speaking of ego.
Yeah. You want to talk about Sam Bankman-Fried now?
Yes.
Okay.
Please. Let's talk about the guy that almost single-handedly killed the crypto industry a few weeks ago.
Yeah. What do you want to know?
How is that even possible?
That's what
it doesn't make sense.
That's what a lot of us are asking. So here's first of all, here's the bottom line: is that it wasn't a crypto failure at all, right? It was just simple bad management and fraud. So while a lot of people are viewing this as a crypto failure or a referendum on the crypto industry, in fact, the FTX saga really is not about crypto at all. It's about fraud and it's about bad governance. So first of all, the idea that he was running FTX, holding customer money as part of the exchange process, and then taking that money without customers' knowledge and putting it into his hedge fund, and then making risky bets out of his hedge fund. I mean, that's a big no-no. You're never supposed to do that kind of thing. And the fact that he had
Ponzi scheme.
It's a Ponzi scheme. That's right. And both companies were located in the Bahamas, so they were outside of the U.S. Regulators' jurisdiction. And so that's the first thing. Second thing is that it's bizarre to me and everybody else in Silicon Valley that some very large, well-known venture capital firms, Sequoia, namely, put a ton of money into FTX, and that FTX didn't have a board of directors, and they didn't even have a CFO.
It was his girlfriend, right? Running Alameda.
His girlfriend was running Alameda. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But FTX itself didn't have a CFO. There was no chief financial officer. So, and there's no board of directors providing any kind of oversight. So, how the hell does a firm like Sequoia Capital put $200 million into a company where there is no financial oversight? They don't have most of the time the VCs want to have a seat on the board, right? That's part of the deal, is that they're going to put a bunch of money in, and so they want to have a seat on the board of directors, and that way they can kind of watch and make sure that the money is being used well, right? That's just basic investing 101. And the fact that Sequoia not only invested a fair amount of money in them, I think it was around $200 million, into a company where they had no oversight, they had no visibility into how the money was actually being used. It's crazy. Absolutely crazy.
But don't they have processes like where, when you go to the bank and you want to take a loan, they make you jump through a lot of hoops until you actually get to that money. So I would think that big companies, when they throw hundreds of millions of dollars around, would also want to know, hey, show us your structure, show us your results, show us your debts, show us your failures. We need to know what we're investing in. So they just skipped all of that?
Apparently the due diligence that they did before the investment was ridiculously shallow. And then even after they made the investment, they had no visibility into the internal operation of the company. And even if SBF was sending them quarterly financial statements or quarterly updates, they had no way of checking to see whether or not those quarterly financial statements were accurate. I mean, it's just crazy. Nobody.
I saw a news 2 days ago. They invested $100 million into a bank that didn't have even $10 million in capital. It was like a tiny storefront, basically. But what does this mean? Because this has happened before, right? Countless of times. We had all these exchanges running through the same problem. They use customers' money to buy themselves yachts and cars and houses and whatever, launder money, and then when people want to withdraw the money, there's no money. So it's happened before. Do you think this would be a case where there's some sort of self-regulation or even proper regulation that's going to happen to the crypto world or not? Or is it just going to be another guy that goes to prison or hides forever?
Yeah, so I think there's going to be a couple things that are going to happen. So first of all, I think venture capitalists are going to be a whole lot more careful that what happened to Sequoia and the others is a lesson that all the other VC firms are going to want to make sure they learn from. So I think you're going to see due diligence be much deeper and much more rigorous on future investments. I also think we're going to go through a time now, the next few months or maybe even few years, where raising venture capital for anything crypto related, I think it's going to be difficult. And then thirdly, I think that there's going to be a lot of appetite in Washington, D.C. for creating some new regulations around crypto. So I think all three of those things will happen, and
it's pretty much needed too.
It's 100% needed. It's 100% needed. Yeah. So I think that I've never really been a crypto guy. I haven't made any crypto investments at all. But I do think that in the long run, that certainly many of the technologies that power the crypto ecosystem will go on and succeed. So, blockchain today, there's all kinds of interesting use cases for blockchain that are outside of the crypto space, right? All kinds of other things you can do with blockchain that are really interesting. Same with NFTs, all kinds of interesting use cases for NFTs that has nothing to do with currency per se. It has to do with fact. There's a lot of things in the world where there's a one-off. There's something we need to keep track of that is unique. There's one of them. And so I think NFT technology you're going to see applied to all kinds of interesting use cases. So I think that in the long run, we'll see lots of interesting stuff come out of this. We'll see lots of new startups, and crypto will end up being stronger because of the new regulations. And so I think it's all good, but an awful lot of people have lost an awful lot of money in the last few weeks.
For the end of it, I know we only have 30 minutes, but if you don't mind, a few more minutes. You came to speak at this conference in Moldova about, I hope you spoke about it, the disruption, the distributed work. The future of work is remote teams, is teams that only visit sometimes. I'm personally a big fan of working from home. I think it makes me more productive. It makes me more happy. I'm a lot less burned out. I can go for a walk whenever I want. I can, do whatever you want. What do you think? Let's explain for everyone. What is distributed work and why is it gaining so much traction?
So I think what is distributed work is pretty simple. And that's, the fact that we don't all have to be in the same office together in order to, run an organization, that we can be distributed, either distributed around the neighborhood in our home offices, or we can be distributed all over the world. So I think that, we were kind of already moving in this direction the last few years, and then COVID suddenly was a forcing function, right? So basically because of technologies, like you and I are talking right now via Zoom, right? And so, technologies like Zoom and all the other video conference platforms, as well as real-time chat like Slack, Discord, WhatsApp. So the combination of those things kind of made it possible, starting around 10 years ago, made it possible to work from home and be nearly as productive as you could be in the office for certain kinds of tasks. So for example, if you write code for a living, if your job is writing code, today you can write code from your desk at home just as well as you can write code sitting at your desk in the office, right? There are other kinds of positions where that's less true. If you're in sales, or if you're in, maybe if you're in some sort of product management role, it's more difficult to be as productive at home as you are in the office, but certainly for roles like writing code, there should be no difference in your productivity sitting at home and sitting in the office if you're writing code. And it's basically technology that has made that possible. As I said, video, chat, online collaboration tools of various kinds, et cetera. So we were already kind of moving in that direction. And then all of a sudden, COVID hit. COVID was a forcing function. Every company in the world suddenly had to try to figure out how to do remote work. And, a lot of companies found that, hey, this actually works okay. And as you said...
And it's cheap.
And it's cheap. That's right. And as you said, turns out that, many, maybe even most employees prefer to work at home. And so that's a pretty significant change. And, every company in the world now in the last kind of year or so since COVID has started to be over, every company has been trying to figure out what is our company policy with regard to remote work moving forward. And some companies have decided to go all remote, all distributed. Some companies have tried to do, kind of a hybrid situation. One of my daughters works for a company in San Francisco, and they're doing Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, everybody has to be in the office. And Monday and Friday, everybody can work remote. So my point is that every company is trying to figure out what is the right policy for them. And
it's like a study case for everyone.
It's a study case for everyone, right?
Yeah.
And in the meantime, any startup who has begun anytime in the last, let's say, 3 years, is a native distributed work company, right? Because any startup that began in the last 3 years began as a distributed work company, and most of them probably are just going to stay that way. And so I think we'll see in the next 5 years, we'll see more and more big successful companies that are native distributed work companies.
But does this mean that maybe soon we'll be all heading towards a 4-day work week? What's the future of work in general as you see it? I know it's not really your field, but maybe you can make a prediction. Are we heading towards productivity versus presence? Versus the timesheets or whatever they were called that you put in at the factory, that you did so many hours in a week. This is going to have to morph into something new, right?
Yes, but it also depends a lot on the sector and the particular job. So, those of us that are in the tech industry, we tend to think of everything as being tech, right? But there's still a lot of factory jobs in the world, and for those factory jobs, you still have to show up at the factory and work in the factory, and you still have to, clock your hours. And so, those jobs aren't likely to change nearly as much, whereas knowledge workers like you and me, I think the definitions of the way in which we work are certainly going to change. I love the idea of a 4-day work week. I'd love the idea of a 3-day work week. I'd be happy to work. I'd be happy to work.
I'd be happy to work on the weekends.
No, if I could. So let's say 40 hours is a full week, right? I'd be happy if I could get all 40 hours done in 3 days and then have the rest of the week off. I would be happy with that. I know a guy who works at Stanford Hospital, as a doctor at Stanford Hospital, and so he does 3 12-hour shifts in the hospital, and then he's done for the week. And I love that, but I couldn't do that because in my work, well, first of all, my work at Stanford, I have classes scheduled. And then secondly, in my other work, I get emails and messages all week long that I have to respond to. So I can't, I can't just turn off all my messaging systems for.
You can work at 9 p.m., 10 p.m., midnight.
Yeah.
I was talking to my wife last night, and then at 8 p.m. I'm like, oh shit, I have a call. So I jump out of the couch to go do this call because I completely forgot about it. So we're kind of like doctors and firefighters. Like we could work 24 hours a day. It just doesn't mean that we will.
Well, I would say the nice thing about having your own startup is that you can work any 7 days a week you want.
That's great. Bret, thank you very much for accepting to do this podcast. I was really honored to have this conversation with you. I hope we can, if you ever come here physically, maybe we could meet and do a podcast face to face. But if there's anything ever you wanted to disrupt, we could disrupt it on this podcast. I'd love to do that.
Deal. So let me just say, with regard to the remote work thing, distributed work thing. So here's my high level way of expressing the new era that we're going into, is that we're entering a place agnostic world, meaning that it no longer matters what place you are in, right? Whereas it used to matter a lot. So the fact that you are in Moldova doing a podcast that can have a worldwide audience, and you could actually be doing this podcast from anywhere and have a worldwide audience, right? And so we're entering a place agnostic world where it matters less today what place you're in than ever before in human history. And I think that's pretty interesting.
I hope everyone will get to experience that, because it's a cool feeling. And unfortunately, not everyone does get to experience that. They look at you like you're weird. Like, what, you work from home? How's that possible? And yes, I actually work. I just sit in my house, but I still work.
Exactly.
All right. Thank you very much. And I wish you a happy morning to you and an easy week ahead. And hopefully we can push the recession as much as possible.
We'll do our best. All right. Thanks, Alex. I enjoyed it.